No contact doesn't hurt you. It destroys the avoidant. You know what's ironic? When you go no contact, most people assume you're the one who's going to be suffering, that you're sitting by your phone, waiting, breaking down, hurting. But here's the truth. You're not weak. You're healing. And the one who's truly being impacted is the avoidant. Let's talk about the avoidant. They push people away the moment things get real. They run at the sight of intimacy. They confuse emotional connection with danger. They fear being seen. And when you go silent, when you remove your presence, you're not just being quiet, you're showing them what life is like without your steady, loving, emotionally available self. That's terrifying to them. You see, when you don't chase, when you stop explaining yourself, stop trying to get them to see you, something powerful happens. You're no longer playing their game. And for the first time, they sit with the silence they created. Not the silence that punishes, the silence that reflects. Because here's what no one tells you: avoidants feel the loss. They just delay the reaction. It hits them weeks, sometimes months later. But when it does, it's brutal. Because by the time they wake up, they realize you're no longer an option. You're no longer waiting. And that's the difference. You're not going, no contact, to manipulate. You're doing it to reclaim your power, to retrain your nervous system, and to remind yourself that love shouldn't feel like survival. You don't heal by getting closure from someone who's unavailable. You heal by creating peace without them. So stop wondering if your silence is doing anything. It is. It's shaking the foundation of their comfort zone. It's showing them what real consequences feel like. And more importantly, it's giving your life back. When people talk about no contact, they often see it as a passive act, like doing nothing, waiting in silence, hoping someone notices you're gone. But in reality, you're not. Going no contact isn't weak. It isn't avoidance. It's one of the strongest, most emotionally courageous things you can do, especially when your heart is involved. Walking away from someone you care about, someone you thought you had a future with, requires strength. Not because you don't care, but because you finally realize that caring alone isn't enough. Choosing no contact means you're no longer willing to sacrifice your emotional well-being for the mere hope of being chosen. You're stepping out of the exhausting cycle of chasing, explaining, over-functioning, and constantly trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't or wouldn't meet you halfway. That's not weakness. That's reclaiming your dignity. It's easy to stay in contact when you're scared of letting go. It's easy to keep that door slightly open, to text, to check in, to scroll their social media hoping for a sign that they miss you. But every time you break no contact, what you're actually doing is teaching your nervous system to tolerate uncertainty, to stay addicted to unpredictability, to normalize the feeling of being emotionally undernourished. And over time, that becomes your new baseline. Loving someone who doesn't consistently show up for you feels like love because your nervous system has learned to mistake anxiety for chemistry. But when you go no contact, you're not just setting a boundary with the other person. You're setting a boundary with your own self-sabotaging patterns. You're saying, I'm no longer available for confusion. I'm no longer chasing someone who runs. That's incredibly hard. It takes real strength to stop explaining your worth to someone who isn't listening. It takes self-trust to walk away without closure. And it takes emotional maturity to realize that not all connections are meant to be completed through reunion. Some are meant to be closed through self-respect. No contact is power because it puts the focus back where it belongs, on you. It's not about making them miss you or getting them to change. It's about honoring what you know deep down, that your peace is more important than their potential, that your needs are valid, and that your capacity for love is too valuable to be spent on someone who only shows up when it's convenient. This isn't about ego. It's not about being cold or punishing someone for being avoidant. It's about realizing that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not to react, not to chase, not to argue, but to choose silence. And in that silence, you find your strength. Because true isn't loud, it doesn't beg or plead. True power is quiet, calm, and unwavering. It walks away with grace and lets the absence speak for itself. Avoidants are masters of appearing unaffected. They seem cool, detached, and even indifferent in the face of emotional disconnection. When someone like you pulls away, it's about you not. It might look they don't notice or care, but don't mistake the absence of a reaction for the absence of an impact. It's not that avoidants don't feel, it's that they don't on your timeline. Their defense mechanism is delay. It's detachment now, devastation later. They compartmentalize. This isn't about you not. Push things down and tell themselves they're fine, even when they're anything but. When you go no contact with an avoidant, what you're actually doing is disrupting their emotional safety net. You see, as much as avoidants fear intimacy, they also crave connection. The difference is they want that connection on their terms, when it doesn't threaten their independence, their sense of control, or their comfort. As long as you're there, reaching out, staying open, or even just leaving the door cracked, they get to enjoy emotional proximity without the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. Your presence allows them to stay emotionally distant while still feeling connected enough to feel secure. But the moment you remove that presence, something shifts. At first, they may feel relief, less pressure, more space. But over time, the silence becomes a mirror. Without you reaching out, without your energy propping up the connection, they're left with the echo of their own emotional patterns. That silence isn't nothing, it's the sound of their comfort zone collapsing. And the thing about avoidance is they often don't realize what they had until it's fully gone. While you're healing, reflecting, and possibly moving on, they're just beginning to process the loss. Avoidants aren't immune to emotional pain. In fact, many of them are deeply sensitive underneath their avoidance strategies. The difference is they've learned to suppress emotion instead of express it. When you go no contact, the structure that allowed them to stay emotionally distant starts to crack. The convenience of emotional detachment disappears. They're forced to sit with the question, why aren't they chasing me anymore? It's not just your absence that affects them. It's what your absence represents: the end of unconditional access, the end of safety without accountability. And for someone who's avoidant, that can be deeply destabilizing. They built their identity around not needing others, around staying emotionally above water. But you walking away triggers something deeper. The fear that maybe, just maybe, they pushed away the one person who truly saw them and still choose them. It's in your absence that they begin to feel the cost of their avoidance, not just in theory, but in their day-to-day life. The texts that don't come, the voice that doesn't call, the warmth that's no longer available to them. By the time that realization hits, the damage is often already done. And while they may reach out eventually, this usually you've done after you've the hard work of detaching, healing, and growing past them. That's the irony of avoiding connection. You don't escape pain, you just delay it until it's too late to fix. Silence is often misunderstood. People think it's cold, manipulative, or punishing. But in truth, silence can be one of the most compassionate and powerful tools in emotional healing. Not just for you, but even for the person you're no longer engaging with. When you go no contact and stay silent, you're not trying to teach someone a lesson or make them suffer. You're allowing space for clarity, for reflection, and for avoidance. People who constantly distract themselves from intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional accountability. Silence does something no confrontation ever could. It forces them to sit with the emotional consequences of their behavior. Most avoidants are used to a cycle. They pull away, someone chases, they get cold, someone leans in, they become inconsistent, and someone overcompensates to hold the connection together. This cycle keeps them from ever having to face the discomfort of their emotional unavailability. As long as you're engaging, whether you're pleading, explaining, arguing, or even just checking in, you're participating in that cycle. You're giving them an excuse to keep avoiding the real issue. But silence removes that escape route. It removes the noise. It says, I'm not going to shout over your emotional wall anymore. And in that space, a mirror appears. Now, for the first time, they have to confront what's left when the validation, attention, and emotional labor you provided are gone. That's when reflection begins. Not always immediately, but eventually. It's in the quiet moments, when the distractions fade and the ego calms down, that people are most likely to face the truth. For the avoidant, your silence doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like exposure. They're left alone with the voice they've been trying to ignore, the one that says, maybe I'm the problem. That voice gets louder in the absence of your reassurance. It's no longer drowned out by the comfort of knowing you're always there. And while they may try to fill that space quickly, through distraction, rebound relationships, or hyper-independence, none of those things satisfy what they're truly missing: a connection with someone who saw them and still chose them. Reflection doesn't always lead to growth, but it always leads to awareness. And that awareness is impossible without the distance silence provides. You're no longer arguing your point, trying to be understood, or explaining how you feel for the 100th time. You've stepped out of the arena completely. And that absence, that stillness, it speaks volumes. It says more than any long message ever could. It says, I'm not going to beg to be treated well. It's easy to think that being silent means you've given up. But silence isn't surrender. It's strength. It's self-trust. This has been about you, and it's believing that the right person need to be chased. They need to meet you where you are. Your silence creates space not just for them to reflect, but for you to reset, to remember who you are, and to realize that if someone has to be chased to care, they were never capable of real connection in the first place. Closure is one of the most misunderstood in relationships. We're told we need it to move on, that we need that final conversation, that explanation, that moment of mutual understanding where both people get to walk away in peace. But the truth is, in many cases, closure doesn't come from someone else, especially not from someone emotionally unavailable or avoidant. Waiting for closure from someone who couldn't show up for you in the relationship is like waiting for water from a dry well. It only keeps you thirsty. And more importantly, it keeps you stuck. People who are avoidant don't always know why they pull away. They don't understand their own patterns deeply enough to explain them in a way that will satisfy your need for resolution. Even if they gave you an answer, it might be vague, defensive, or superficial. I'm not ready. It's not you, it's me. I just need space. And while those words can sound like closure, they often leave more questions than answers. Because what you really want isn't just invalidation. You want them to see your value, to recognize the pain they caused, and to acknowledge that what you shared mattered. This isn't about you not, but if they couldn't give you that when you were emotionally open and available, what makes you think they'll give it now? This is where real healing begins. When you stop waiting for them to give you peace and start creating it for yourself. Closure doesn't come from hearing them say, I messed up. It comes from you saying, I deserved better. Closure comes from understanding your own boundaries, your own patterns, and your own worth. It comes from realizing that you don't need someone to validate your experience for it to be real. If it hurt, it hurt. If you were left confused, you were left confused. And your healing isn't dependent on someone else acknowledging that. Clarity replaces closure when you step back and see the relationship for what it was, not what you hoped it could become. You start to notice the inconsistencies, the emotional unavailability, the moments you overlook red flags because you wanted to believe in their potential. Clarity is when the fog lifts and you finally say, they weren't ready, and I can't keep losing myself waiting for them to become ready. That's not bitterness, that's acceptance. It's not easy. The urge to reach out, to get that final word can feel overwhelming, but every time you seek closure from someone incapable of giving it, you hand them more power over your healing. And the longer you do that, the longer you delay the peace you deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop asking why and start saying, enough. You don't need an apology to forgive. You don't need an explanation to understand. And you don't need closure to move on. You just need the clarity to see that their behavior was the answer all along. And the courage to let that answer be enough. There's a moment in every emotion-draining relationship when you stop asking, how do I get them back? And start asking, why was I fighting so hard for someone who made me feel small? That moment is where real transformation begins. When you choose no contact and stick to it. Not as a tactic, but as a boundary, you start to see the situation different. Realize you were never really afraid of losing them. You were afraid of losing the idea of who they could be. And that idea, more than the actual relationship, is what kept you stuck. The truth is you're not losing them. You're rediscovering yourself. You're finding the parts of you that got buried in the chase, the confidence that eroded when they pulled away, the self-worth that took a hit every time they didn't show up, the clarity that disappeared in the confusion they created. You start remembering who you were before you twist yourself into someone smaller just to be tolerated. You find your voice again, not the one that pleads, explains, or negotiates for love, but the one that says, I don't have to prove myself to be chosen. When you're constantly managing someone else's emotions, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their fears or avoidant behaviors, you lose touch with your own emotional needs. You start shrinking your expectations just to keep the peace. And in doing that, you start disappearing from your own life. That's the real cost of staying in a relationship that requires you to abandon part self just to keep someone else close. But when you go no contact, that fog begins to lift. You're no longer spending your emotional energy decoding mixed signals or trying to earn bare minimum effort. You're able to redirect that energy inward, to heal, to grow, to reestablish your standards. For the first time in a long time, you realize you don't need to be chosen by someone emotionally unavailable to feel valuable. Your worth was never tied to their ability to recognize it. Just because someone failed to love you in the way you needed doesn't mean you're unlovable. This isn't about you not. It just means they weren't equipped to hold the kind of connection you were offering. That's not your failure. That's their limitation. And the more distance you put between yourself and that dynamic, the more clearly you see that what you called love was really emotional survival. It was the hope that if you just did a little more, gave a little, wait a little longer, they'd finally show up. But love shouldn't feel like waiting to be seen. It shouldn't feel like trying to convince someone to care. Real love meets you where you are. It doesn't demand your silence. It doesn't require self-abandonment. This isn't about when you finally stop reaching out, not punish them, but to protect your peace. You're not losing anything essential. You're reclaiming everything that got lost while you were trying to hold on to someone who couldn't hold you back. You're not losing them. You're finally finding you. Thank you for holding space for this message. Whether you're healing from heartbreak, navigating distance, or learning to let go, your journey matters. And the fact that you're here, choosing yourself even in the midst of uncertainty, is powerful. Keep going, keep growing, and most importantly, keep choosing you. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, stay worthy. Goodbye for now, and thank you.